My name is Claire, and I am 27 years old, an independent artist in Boston trying to make ends meet. I was finishing a commission at my studio when my phone buzzed. The message from my mom read, "We changed all the locks. You do not have a home anymore. Let us see how brave you are now." Haha. It felt like being punched in the stomach. I could not breathe. For 2 days, I struggled with homelessness and betrayal. Then an email arrived from our family lawyer. "We have a problem. Call immediately." Before I continue with what happened next, let me know where you are watching from and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself when everyone else has given up on you. Growing up, I had always been a daddy's girl. My father, James, taught me everything I knew about art and creativity. He would spend hours with me in his small home studio, teaching me how to mix colors, how to see the world through an artist's perspective, and most importantly, how to express myself through my work. Those were the happiest memories of my childhood. We would laugh, paint, and talk about everything under the sun. He always believed in me, always told me I had a special gift that needed to be shared with the world. But then cancer took him when I was 15. It happened so fast. 1 month he was fine, the next he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and 3 months later he was gone. The void he left behind was enormous, and neither my mom nor I knew how to fill it. My mother, Susan, had always been a strong woman. Before my father's death, she was loving, supportive, and had a wonderful sense of humor. She worked as an elementary school teacher and loved her job. We were a happy middle-class family living in a modest house filled with love and laughter. But losing Dad changed her. She became withdrawn, anxious, and seemed lost without him. 2 years after Dad died, Mom met Robert at a school fundraiser. He was a successful businessman who owned several real estate companies across the state. On the surface, he was charming, well-mannered, and seemed to genuinely care about my mother. For the first time since Dad died, I saw her smile again, and that made me happy for her. They got married rather quickly, just 6 months after meeting. With Robert came a new lifestyle. We moved from our cozy house to a large mansion in the suburbs. Suddenly, we had house staff, fancy cars, and designer clothes. My mother quit her teaching job because Robert insisted she did not need to work anymore. When my half-sister Lily was born, things began to change even more. Lily was 7 years younger than me and became the center of attention. She was Robert's biological child, and it was clear from the beginning that he favored her. My mother perhaps unconsciously began to follow his lead. The beautiful mansion we lived in never felt like home to me. Every corner of it reminded me that this was Robert's house, not ours. The only space that felt somewhat mine was the small room I had converted into an art studio where I kept all the supplies and paintings my father had left me. As I grew older, the differences between Robert's vision for my life and my own became more apparent. He considered art a hobby at best, a waste of time at worst. He wanted me to study business or law, something practical that would guarantee financial success. My mother, who once encouraged my artistic pursuits, began to echo his sentiments. "Claire, maybe Robert is right," she would say. "Art is a difficult career path. We just want what is best for you." But I knew what was best for me. I knew what made my heart sing. And it was not sitting in an office crunching numbers or drafting legal documents. It was creating, expressing, bringing beauty into the world just like my father had taught me. The arguments increased in frequency and intensity. Robert would criticize my choice of friends, my clothes, my late nights painting, and especially my decision to major in fine arts in college. My mother would stand silently beside him, occasionally nodding in agreement, occasionally trying to mediate, but never really standing up for me. "Why can you not be more grateful for everything Robert has given us?" she would ask in private after particularly heated arguments. "He has provided us with a beautiful home, financial security, and he really does care about your future." But I could see what she could not. I could see how Robert had methodically made her dependent on him financially and emotionally, how he had isolated her from her old friends and colleagues, how he controlled every aspect of our lives under the guise of taking care of us. And it frightened me. I missed the mother I used to know, the one who would laugh until tears streamed down her face, the one who would stand up for what she believed in, the one who had encouraged me to follow my dreams just like Dad had. Sometimes when Robert was away on business trips, I would catch glimpses of her old self. We would cook together, watch old movies, or just talk about Dad. But as soon as Robert returned, she would revert to this new version of herself. the one who seemed to exist only to please him and maintain the perfect image of their family. By the time I graduated college, I knew I needed to get out of that house, not just for my career, but for my sanity. The constant pressure to be someone I was not, the walking on eggshells around Robert, the pain of watching my mother slowly disappear before my eyes. It was all too much. And so, despite their objections, I made a decision that would forever change the course of our relationship. A decision that, looking back now, was the first step on a long and painful journey that would eventually lead me to that devastating text message and the surprising events that followed. After graduation, I found a small apartment near the art district in Boston. It was tiny, barely 500 square feet with peeling wallpaper and a temperamental heating system. But it was mine. After graduation, I found a small apartment near the art district in Boston. It was tiny, barely 500 square feet with peeling wallpaper and a temperamental heating system, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely without Robert's disapproving glances or my mother's disappointed sighs. The rent was steep for what it was, but the location was perfect. I was within walking distance of several galleries and studios, and most importantly, I was close to Hartman's art studio, where I had managed to secure an entry-level position. The pay was minimal, barely enough to cover rent and groceries, but I was learning from some of the most talented artists in the city. My boss, David, was a renowned sculptor who had taken a chance on me after seeing my portfolio. "You have raw talent, Claire," he had said. "With the right guidance and a lot of hard work, you could really make a name for yourself." His belief in me was a balm for my soul after years of having my passion dismissed as a hobby. My mother's reaction to my move was predictable. First came the guilt trips. "After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us, by abandoning your family." Then the comparisons. "Your cousin Sarah just got accepted to law school, and here you are, throwing your life away on finger paintings." And finally, the cold acceptance tinged with disappointment. "Fine, do what you want, but do not come crying to us when you cannot pay your bills." Robert was less subtle. "This is a mistake you will regret," he said coldly. "The real world is not kind to dreamers, Claire, and when you fail, do not expect us to bail you out." Their words hurt, but I was determined to prove them wrong. I worked tirelessly, often putting in 14-hour days between my job at the studio and my own artwork. Slowly but surely, my pieces began to sell in local shops and small galleries. Not for much, but enough to give me hope that I was on the right path. About 6 months after I moved out, I remembered something important. Before my father died, he had set up a trust fund for me with his life insurance money and some savings. It was not a fortune, but it was meant to help me through college, and perhaps provide a down payment for a house someday. I had been so young when he passed that I had nearly forgotten about it. The trust would have matured when I turned 25, which was 2 years ago. I called my mother to ask about it. Her response was evasive. "Oh, that old thing. I think Robert reinvested it for you. It is all very complicated. We can discuss it at Thanksgiving." Thanksgiving came, and I returned to the mansion, hoping for some clarity about my inheritance. The dinner was tense, with Robert dominating the conversation, talking about his latest business ventures and Lily's achievements in elementary school. I waited until dessert to bring up the trust fund. "Mom, about Dad's trust fund for me." I began carefully. "I was wondering if I could access it now. I am thinking of buying a small condo instead of renting, and that money would really help with the down payment." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother looked at Robert, who put down his fork with deliberate slowness. "That money is gone, Claire," he said bluntly. "What do you mean gone?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. "We needed it for some investments." My mother jumped in, her voice high and nervous. "For the family, for Lily's future." I could not believe what I was hearing. That was my inheritance from Dad. How could you use it without even telling me? "You were a minor when the decisions were made," Robert said coldly. "Your mother had legal authority to manage those funds as she saw fit. But I have not been a minor for years, and the trust matured when I turned 25. That money was legally mine." My mother looked uncomfortable, but stood her ground. "Robert is much better with finances than your father ever was. He made the decision with my full support. It was for the best, Claire." I was stunned, not just by the loss of the money, which was significant, but by the realization that my mother had completely changed. The woman who sat across from me was not the mother I remembered. She was someone else entirely, someone who would take what my father had lovingly set aside for me and give it away without a second thought. I cannot believe you would do this to me, I said, tears welling in my eyes. Dad wanted that money for me, for my future. Your father had unrealistic expectations, Robert interjected. He encouraged your artistic delusions. We are just trying to be practical. That was the last straw. My artistic delusions were something my father believed in, something he valued. Unlike you, he saw more to life than just money and status. I left that night and did not speak to them for months. The loss of the trust fund meant I had to work even harder to make ends meet. I took on freelance graphic design projects, taught evening art classes at the community center, and picked up weekend shifts at a local coffee shop. My dream of buying my own place was postponed indefinitely. Life became a constant struggle to stay afloat financially while still pursuing my passion. There were nights when I would sit in my tiny apartment exhausted from working 3 jobs and wonder if Robert had been right. Maybe I was being naive. Maybe I should have chosen a more practical path. But then I would look at my paintings, at the pieces I had created from my heart and soul, and I would remember my father's words, "Art is not just what you do, Claire. It is who you are." And I would find the strength to keep going. Little did I know that the worst betrayal was yet to come, and that my discovery of what really happened to my father's company would set in motion a chain of events that would change all our lives forever. The revelation came unexpectedly on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in spring. I was at a small cafe near my studio sketching ideas for a new series of paintings when someone called my name. Looking up, I saw an older gentleman with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that somehow seemed familiar. Claire Winston. Good Lord, you look just like your father. The man introduced himself as Walter Grayson, a former colleague and close friend of my father's crisis. They had worked together at my dad's graphic design company for over a decade before my father's illness. I have been meaning to reach out to you for years, Walter said, sliding into the chair across from me. But after James passed, your mother made it clear the family needed space. And then when she married that man, his voice trailed off, and something in his expression made my heart skip a beat. What about Robert? I asked. Walter hesitated. I do not know how to say this, but there is something you should know about your stepfather and your father's company. Over the next hour, Walter told me a story that made my blood run cold. My father's company, Winston Designs, had been moderately successful with a loyal client base and solid reputation in the industry. When Dad got sick, Robert, who at that time was just an acquaintance of the family with a background in business, had offered to help manage the company during my father's treatment. Your father was so grateful, Walter explained. He was worried about providing for you and your mother if the worst happened. Robert seemed like a godsend. But according to Walter, Robert's help came with hidden motives. As my father's condition worsened, Robert had maneuvered himself into a position of greater control within the company. He had convinced my father to sign over increasing shares of the business to him, supposedly to streamline decision-making during the crisis. By the time your father passed, Robert owned 51% of Winston Designs. Walter said, his voice heavy with regret. Within 6 months, he had merged it with one of his other companies, laid off most of the original staff, including me, and essentially stripped it for parts. The Winston name and legacy disappeared. I sat there stunned. Does my mother know about this? Walter shook his head. I tried to talk to her after the funeral, but she was so grief-stricken, and Robert was always there, always intervening. Eventually, he made it clear that my presence was not welcome. That conversation with Walter sparked something in me. I began to investigate, reaching out to other former employees of my father's company, digging through the old documents I had kept after his death, searching online for records of the business transactions. What I discovered was even worse than Walter had suggested. Robert had not just taken advantage of my dying father's vulnerability, he had actively manipulated him. There were emails showing how Robert had presented my father with misleading financial reports, making the company seem in worse shape than it actually was to justify his increasing control. There were testimonies from former employees about how Robert had isolated my father from his business partners during his final months. And most damning of all, I found a draft of my father's original will, which indicated that the company was to be held in trust for me until I turned 25, with my mother receiving the profits in the meantime. Somehow, that version of the will had never been formally executed. Instead, a newer version, signed just weeks before my father's death, when he was heavily medicated, had left everything in my mother's control with no specific provisions for the company. Armed with this evidence, I made what was perhaps the biggest mistake of my life. I decided to confront my mother and Robert directly. I arrived at their mansion unannounced. One evening, my car trunk filled with documents and my heart pounding with righteous anger. Robert was surprised to see me, but maintained his usual facade of polite disinterest. My mother seemed genuinely happy for my visit, which only made what I was about to do more painful. "I know what you did," I said, once we were all seated in their opulent living room. "I know how you stole Dad's company, how you manipulated him when he was sick and vulnerable." Robert's face hardened, but he did not speak. My mother looked confused. "Claire, what are you talking about? Robert helped us during the worst time of our lives." "No, Mom. He used that time to take everything Dad built, everything that should have been ours, yours, and mine." I pulled out the documents, laying them on the coffee table one by one. "Look at these. Look at what he did." As my mother reluctantly began to examine the evidence, Robert stood up. "This is ridiculous. You are delusional, Claire. Always have been living in some fantasy world where your father was some kind of saint, and I am the villain. These are your emails, Robert. Your signature on these documents. Your name on the incorporation papers that dissolved Dad's company and absorbed it into your conglomerate." My mother's face had gone pale. "Robert, is this true?" For a moment, I thought I had gotten through to her. I thought she would finally see Robert for who he really was. But then he placed his hand on her shoulder, and I watched as she physically leaned into his touch, drawing strength from him. "Susan, your daughter has always resented me. She has always been jealous of our happiness, of the life we have built together. Now she is trying to drive a wedge between us with these fabrications." "They are not fabrications," I shouted, my composure finally breaking. Walter confirmed everything. So did half a dozen other people who worked with Dad. "You took advantage of him when he was dying. And you have been taking advantage of Mom ever since." "Walter Grayson," my mother's voice was sharp, "that man was always jealous of your father's success. And now he is filling your head with lies. Because he is jealous of Robert too." I could not believe what I was hearing. "Mom, please just look at the evidence. Talk to these people yourself. If you do not believe me, I think you should leave," Robert said, his voice dangerously quiet, "and take your accusations with you. If you persist with this slander, I will have no choice but to take legal action against your own stepdaughter." I was incredulous. "You are no daughter of mine," he replied coldly. "And from the way you are behaving, I am not sure you are much of a daughter to your mother either." I looked at my mother, waiting for her to defend me, to say something, anything that would indicate she was still the woman who had raised me. Instead, she stood up and moved to Robert's side. "I think it would be best if you left, Claire," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have upset Robert. You have upset me. I do not know why you are doing this, but it needs to stop." "Mom, he is manipulating you just like he manipulated Dad. Can you not see that?" "Enough!" she shouted suddenly, finding her voice. "Just go. Go back to your little apartment and your little art projects and leave us alone." I left that night with tears streaming down my face, my mother's words ringing in my ears. But I was not ready to give up. I spent the next few weeks compiling more evidence, reaching out to more of my father's former colleagues, and even consulting with a lawyer about the possibility of challenging the will or bringing some kind of fraud case against Robert. The lawyer was not optimistic. "Too much time has passed," he explained, "and without your mother's cooperation, it would be very difficult to prove anything. The statute of limitations has expired on most of these transactions." I was about to leave his office when he asked, "Does your stepfather know you are looking into this?" "Yes," I admitted. "I confronted him and my mother about it." The lawyer frowned. "Be careful. Men like that who are used to getting their way can be dangerous when they feel threatened." I should have taken his warning more seriously. 3 days later, I returned to my apartment after a long day at the studio to find my door ajar. Inside, the place had been ransacked. My laptop was gone, along with all my external hard drives and the physical documents I had collected about my father's company. Even my sketchbooks had been taken. I called the police, but without any signs of forced entry, they suggested it was likely someone I knew. They took a report, but did not seem hopeful about recovering my belongings. I knew who was behind it. Robert had sent someone to destroy my evidence, but proving it was impossible, I called my mother, desperate and scared. Someone broke into my apartment, Mom. They took everything. All my work, all my documents about Dad's company. It had to be Robert. Her response chilled me to the bone. Perhaps this is a sign, Claire. A sign that you need to stop this crusade and move on with your life. Robert and I are happily married. Lily is thriving. Why can you not just let us be happy? Because he stole from us, Mom. From you, from me, from Dad's legacy. Do not call again unless you are ready to apologize, she said, and hung up. That night was the lowest point of my life. I felt completely alone, betrayed by the one person who should have been on my side. No matter what, I had no evidence, no allies, except for a few of my father's old colleagues who were themselves afraid of Robert's influence, and no clear path forward. I slept in my car that night too, afraid to stay in my apartment. The next morning, exhausted and heartbroken, I went to the studio, the only place I still felt safe. David took one look at me and led me to his office. What happened? He asked. And suddenly I was telling him everything, the words pouring out between sobs. When I finished, he sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, "You can stay with me and my wife until you find a new place. And I know someone who might be able to help you with the legal side of things. A friend from college who specializes in corporate fraud." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I did not know then that things would get much worse before they got better, or that the text message that would arrive on my phone just weeks later would mark both the deepest betrayal and the beginning of an unexpected resolution. I had been staying with David and his wife Olivia for nearly 3 weeks when the text message came. I was sitting in their guest room, trying to recreate some of the sketches I had lost in the break-in, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from my mother. "We changed all the locks. You do not have a home anymore. Let us see how brave you are now. Ha ha." I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend that my own mother would send something so cruel. The ha-ha at the end was what hurt the most, as if my homelessness and distress were amusing to her. I tried calling her immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried Robert's number too, with the same result. Even the house line rang endlessly with no answer. That text confirmed what I had feared since our confrontation. My mother had chosen Robert over me, her own daughter. She had fully embraced his version of reality, where I was the troublemaker, the ungrateful child who needed to be punished. I showed the message to Olivia, who had become a supportive friend despite having known me for such a short time. She was outraged. "This is emotional abuse, Claire. No mother should ever speak to her child this way, no matter what disagreements you have." "I think Robert wrote it," I said quietly. "It does not sound like my mom, but the fact that it came from her phone, that she allowed it." "Either way, it is unacceptable," Olivia said firmly. "And you can stay here as long as you need to. You are not homeless." I was grateful for their generosity, but I felt like a burden. David and Olivia had a small apartment themselves, and while they never complained, I knew my presence was disrupting their routine. I needed to find my own place, but with my savings depleted and my work materials stolen, I was struggling to get back on my feet. The next 2 days were a blur of emotions. I cycled through grief, anger, and determination. I tried to focus on my work at the studio, but concentration was impossible. I kept checking my phone, hoping for another message from my mother, perhaps an apology or explanation, but there was nothing. Then, exactly 48 hours after the text, an email arrived from an address I recognized, Harold Brown, the family lawyer who had handled my father's estate. The subject line was ominous, urgent. "We have a problem. Call immediately." My first instinct was to delete it. This had to be another trap, another way for Robert to manipulate me or gather information about what I was planning. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the email. "Claire, I need to speak with you as soon as possible regarding a matter of extreme urgency concerning your mother and stepfather. Please call my office or my cell phone number below at your earliest convenience. This is not something that should be discussed via email. Harold Brown." I showed it to David, who had become my de facto advisor in this mess. He frowned. "It could be legitimate. Harold Brown has been your family's lawyer since your father was alive, right? He has his own practice separate from Robert's business interests." "Yes," I confirmed. "Dad trusted him. He handled all our family matters, but that was years ago, before Robert took over everything. I think you should call, but be cautious. Do not reveal any information about where you are staying or what you plan to do, and use my phone, not yours, in case they are trying to track your location. With shaking hands, I dialed the number from David's phone. Harold answered on the second ring. Harold Brown speaking. Mr. Brown, it is Claire Winston. There was an audible sigh of relief. Claire, thank goodness. I have been trying to reach you for days. I got your email. What is this about? I cannot discuss all the details over the phone, but I need you to come to my office as soon as possible. It concerns Robert. He has been arrested. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Arrested for what? Financial fraud, money laundering, several other charges. The FBI has been investigating him for months. They raided your mother's house yesterday and seized computers, documents, everything. Your mother is not under arrest, but she is being questioned as a potential accomplice or witness. It is a mess, Claire. I could hardly process what I was hearing. But what does this have to do with me? Why are you calling me? There was a pause. 2 reasons. First, some of the evidence that triggered the investigation apparently came from documents similar to what you were collecting about your father's company. The FBI won't confirm, but I suspect someone you spoke to went to the authorities. My mind immediately went to Walter. He had been the most outspoken about Robert's tactics. And second, Harold continued, your mother asked me to contact you. Despite everything, she needs you now, Claire. She is scared, confused, and from what I can gather, beginning to realize the extent of Robert's deceptions. She sent me a text 2 days ago telling me, I do not have a home anymore, I said, my voice hard. She chose him over me repeatedly. Why should I help her now? That text was not from your mother, Harold said quietly. It was from Robert. He took her phone and sent it without her knowledge. She only found out about it during the questioning yesterday when the FBI showed her the message history. She was devastated, Claire. Whatever you may think of her choices, I do not believe she would ever intentionally hurt you that way. I sat down heavily, trying to absorb this new information. So Robert sent that text. Why? What was the point? From what I understand, Robert knew the investigation was closing in. He was becoming increasingly paranoid, and he saw you as a threat. The text was meant to cut you off completely from your mother, to isolate both of you from each other so neither of you would compare notes, so to speak. It made a sick kind of sense. Robert had always operated by isolating people, manipulating them when they were vulnerable and alone. There is more, Harold said. The FBI has evidence that Robert has been systematically draining your mother's accounts, moving assets into offshore holdings. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. There are liens against most of their properties, and your mother's name is on many of the questionable documents, though she claims she did not understand what she was signing. So, she could go to jail too. The thought was horrifying despite everything. It is a possibility, though. I am doing everything I can to establish that she was another victim of Robert's manipulations. The fact that he used her phone to send threatening messages to you actually helps establish a pattern of control. I took a deep breath. When can I see her? She is staying with your aunt in Cambridge for now. The house is still being processed as a crime scene. I can arrange a meeting at my office tomorrow if you are willing. I agreed to the meeting, though my emotions were in turmoil. After I hung up, I told David and Olivia everything. They were as shocked as I was. So, your investigations actually helped bring him down, David said, shaking his head in disbelief. Even though your evidence was stolen, Walter must have gone to the FBI with what he knew, I said, and maybe others did too. I just cannot believe it has all come to this. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about my mother, wondering if she was truly a victim or if she had been more complicit than she was admitting. I thought about the text message that had felt like the final betrayal, now revealed to be Robert's work, not hers, and I thought about what would happen next. Whether there was any way to rebuild the relationship that had been so damaged over the years. Morning came, and with it, a decision. I would meet with my mother and Harold Brown. I would hear them out, but I would proceed with caution, protecting my heart until I knew for certain where she stood and what role she had played in everything that had happened. Little did I know that this meeting would be just the beginning of a journey that would force all of us to confront painful truths, make difficult choices, and ultimately find a way forward from the ashes of what once was our family. The law office of Harold Brown and Associates was located in a stately brick building in downtown Boston. As I climbed the steps that morning, I felt like I was walking to my own trial, about to face judgment for crimes I had not committed. David had offered to come with me, but this was something I needed to do alone. Harold met me in the lobby, his expression somber but kind. "She is waiting in my office," he said. "I should warn you, Claire, she is not in good shape." He was right. When I entered the office, I barely recognized the woman sitting in the leather chair by the window. My mother had always been meticulous about her appearance, Robert having reinforced this tendency with his constant emphasis on appropriate presentation. But the person before me looked like she had aged a decade in a few weeks. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes rumpled, and her eyes hollow with dark circles beneath them. "Claire," she whispered when she saw me. She stood up unsteadily, as if to embrace me, but seemed to think better of it when she saw my expression. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Brown said you wanted to see me," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. We sat across from each other while Harold took his place behind his desk. "I will give you both some privacy if you prefer," he offered, but my mother shook her head. "No, please stay, Harold. I need a witness, and I might need your help explaining some of the legal aspects." She turned to me, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Claire, I do not even know where to begin. There is so much I need to tell you, so much I need to apologize for." "The text message would be a good start," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Tears welled in her eyes. "I swear to you, I never sent that. I did not even know about it until the FBI showed me." Robert took my phone that day. He said he needed to make an important call because his battery was dead. I never imagined he would do something so cruel. I wanted to believe her, but years of disappointment had made me wary. "And what about everything else? The trust fund money that disappeared, Dad's company, the break-in at my apartment. Were you oblivious to all of that too?" She flinched as if I had slapped her. "I knew about the trust fund," she admitted quietly. "Robert convinced me it was necessary for family investments, for Lily's future. I was wrong to agree, and I am so sorry, Claire. As for your father's company, I knew Robert had taken over management, but I never understood the extent of what he had done. Your father trusted him, and I trusted your father's judgment." "Dad was dying," I said bluntly. "He was in pain, on heavy medication. He was not in a position to make sound business decisions, and Robert took advantage of that." "I see that now," she whispered. "But at the time, I was so overwhelmed with grief, with trying to take care of you, with managing your father's medical care. Robert seemed like a godsend. He handled everything, made all the decisions, took all the burden off my shoulders." Harold cleared his throat. "If I may interject, Claire, there is evidence that Robert was administering higher doses of pain medication to your father than prescribed, particularly before meetings where important documents were signed. The FBI found records of this in their investigation." I felt sick. "So he was deliberately keeping Dad sedated to manipulate him?" Harold nodded grimly. "It appears so." My mother let out a choked sob. "I did not know. I should have been paying more attention. Should have questioned things, but I was so broken after losing James. And Robert was so confident, so reassuring. He said all the right things, made me feel safe when everything was falling apart." "And the break-in at my apartment," I pressed. "I swear I knew nothing about that," she said, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "When you called me afterward, Robert was right there, listening to every word. He told me you were making it up for attention, that you were becoming paranoid and needed professional help. I was torn, Claire. Part of me wanted to believe you, but Robert had spent years convincing me that your artistic temperament made you unstable, prone to exaggeration and drama." "So you chose to believe him over your own daughter," I said flatly. "Yes," she admitted, hanging her head. "And there is no excuse for that. None." We sat in silence for a moment. I was trying to process everything, to separate truth from manipulation, to figure out where my mother ended and Robert's influence began. "What happens now?" I finally asked, directing the question to Harold. "Robert will remain in custody pending trial. The evidence against him is substantial, and the prosecution believes he is a flight risk, given the offshore accounts that have been discovered. As for your mother," he glanced at her, "we are cooperating fully with the investigation." We are hoping to establish that she was another victim of Robert's fraud, not an accomplice. And Lily? I asked, suddenly remembering my half-sister. She is with me at your aunt's house, my mother said. She is confused and frightened. She keeps asking when Daddy is coming home. Her voice broke. I do not know what to tell her. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. Lily was an innocent in all this. She was only 7 years old, the same age I had been when my parents were still happily married, when life was simple and safe. What do you need from me? I asked, still not ready to offer forgiveness, but willing to listen. Legally speaking, Harold answered, your testimony about Robert's actions regarding your father's company and the trust fund could be valuable to both the prosecution's case against Robert and our defense of your mother. But that is entirely your decision, Claire. No one would blame you for wanting to keep your distance from this whole mess. My mother looked at me pleadingly. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, Claire. I failed you as a mother. I let my grief and my weakness lead me to trust the wrong person, to allow him to come between us. If you want nothing to do with me after this, I will understand. But please know that I love you. I have always loved you, even when I was too weak to show it properly. I sat there torn between years of hurt and the undeniable evidence of my mother's own victimization. I thought about what my father would want me to do in this situation. He had always taught me about compassion, about understanding that people make mistakes, especially when they are in pain. But he had also taught me about self-respect, about not allowing yourself to be mistreated repeatedly, about standing up for what is right. Even when it is difficult, I made my decision. I will testify, I said. Not for you, I added, looking at my mother, but for Dad, for what Robert did to him when he was vulnerable and dying. For the company he built that was supposed to be part of his legacy to me. Relief washed over her face. Thank you, Claire. But I continued. I need time. I cannot just pretend the last few years never happened. I cannot instantly trust you again after everything that has occurred. She nodded, wiping away tears. I understand. I will wait, however long it takes. Over the next few weeks, I was drawn deeper into the legal proceedings against Robert. I met with FBI agents, prosecutors, and financial forensic experts. I shared everything I knew about my father's company, the trust fund, and Robert's pattern of manipulation and control. During one of these meetings, an FBI agent named Diana Carter pulled me aside. You know, your information was the missing piece we needed, she told me. We had been tracking Robert's financial irregularities for years, but we could never quite establish the pattern of fraudulent behavior beyond a reasonable doubt. Your story about what happened to your father's company, combined with the evidence provided by Walter Grayson and others, gave us the historical context we needed. So Walter did go to the authorities, I said, not entirely surprised. Diana nodded. After your confrontation with Robert, Walter became concerned for your safety. He had witnessed Robert's ruthlessness firsthand and feared he might take extreme measures to silence you. Walter had been reluctant to come forward earlier because of threats Robert had made against his family, but your courage inspired him to finally speak up. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication that my suspicions about Robert had been correct all along, gratitude toward Walter for his eventual bravery, and a strange sort of peace, knowing that my father's story would finally be told and that Robert would face consequences for his actions. As the case progressed, more details emerged about the extent of Robert's criminal activities. He had not just defrauded my father and manipulated my mother. He had engaged in a widespread pattern of financial misconduct that affected dozens of people and companies. The charges against him multiplied: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and even evidence tampering related to the break-in at my apartment. Through it all, I maintained a cautious distance from my mother. We spoke regularly now, usually about practical matters related to the case, but occasionally venturing into more personal territory. She told me about her journey into therapy, about her struggles to understand how she had allowed herself to be so thoroughly manipulated by Robert. The therapist says it was a form of coercive control, she explained during one of our conversations. Robert isolated me, made me financially dependent on him, gradually eroded my self-confidence, and separated me from anyone who might have helped me see what was happening, including you, Claire. I could see the truth in this. I remembered how over the years my mother's circle of friends had dwindled until it consisted solely of Robert's business associates and their wives. How she had given up her teaching career, her hobbies, her independence. How her vibrant personality had been subdued, molded to fit Robert's expectations. Still, understanding did not immediately heal the wounds of the past. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, one small interaction at a time. The pivotal moment came at the preliminary hearing. I had been called to testify about my father's company and the circumstances surrounding the changes to his will. As I entered the courtroom, I saw Robert for the first time since his arrest. He sat at the defense table, impeccably dressed, as always, but without the aura of power and control that had once surrounded him. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed with undisguised hatred. I felt a momentary wave of fear, remembering all the times I had been intimidated by that same look. But then I straightened my spine and met his gaze directly. I was not a child anymore, not the grieving teenager who could be manipulated, not the young adult who could be bullied into silence. I was my father's daughter, and I would speak the truth. My testimony lasted nearly 2 hours. I spoke clearly and factually about what I had discovered, about the evidence Walter and others had provided, about the pattern of deception that had characterized Robert's takeover of my father's company. Throughout it all, Robert stared at me with cold fury, occasionally whispering urgently to his attorney. When I finished and was leaving the witness stand, I passed close to where my mother sat. Without planning to, I reached out and squeezed her hand briefly. It was a small gesture, not forgiveness exactly, but an acknowledgement, a beginning. Outside the courtroom, Harold approached me. "You did well in there, Claire. Very well indeed. The judge seemed convinced by your testimony, and the prosecution is optimistic about their chances when this goes to trial." "What about my mother?" I asked. "Will she face charges?" "It is looking less likely," he replied. "The prosecution seems to be accepting our argument that she was another victim, especially with the evidence of how Robert controlled her communications and finances. The fact that he impersonated her in messages to you has been particularly persuasive." As we were talking, my mother emerged from the courtroom. She looked exhausted, but somehow lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Claire," she said hesitantly, Would you like to come see Lily sometime? She asks about you. She misses her big sister." I had been so focused on the betrayal by my mother and Robert that I had almost forgotten about the innocent child caught in the middle of all this. Lily had done nothing wrong. She was just a little girl who must be confused and frightened by the sudden upheaval in her life. "Yes," I said, "I would like that." It was another small step on what would be a long journey toward healing and rebuilding. But for the first time in years, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. The first time I visited my aunt's house to see my mother and Lily was awkward, to say the least. My Aunt Margaret, my mother's older sister, had always been kind to me, but we had never been particularly close. Robert had made sure of that, gradually cutting off my mother from her family, just as he had from her friends. Margaret greeted me with a warm hug. "It is good to see you, Claire. It has been far too long." Her small suburban home was modest but comfortable, nothing like the ostentatious mansion Robert had insisted upon. It felt more like the homes I remembered from my childhood before Robert entered our lives. Lily was initially shy, hiding behind my mother's legs when I arrived. At 7 years old, she had limited memories of me, as I had not been a regular presence in her life after moving out. But children have a remarkable capacity for adaptation and connection. Within an hour, she was showing me her drawings and telling me about her favorite books. My mother watched our interaction with a mixture of joy and sadness in her eyes. I could see how much it meant to her to have her daughters together, and perhaps also how much it pained her to realize what she had missed all these years. When Lily went to help Aunt Margaret with dinner, my mother and I had our first real moment alone since everything had happened. "She has your father's creativity," my mother said softly, looking at the drawings Lily had shown me. "I see it in the way she thinks, the way she approaches problems. Robert never understood that about her. He was already planning her future in business or law, just like he tried to do with you." "She is lucky," I said. "She is young enough that she might not remember much of this when she is older." My mother nodded. "The therapist says children are resilient, but she has nightmares sometimes. She does not understand why her father is gone. why we had to leave our house, why everything has changed. What have you told her about Robert? The truth, but in a way she can understand. That her father did some bad things with money, that he broke the rules and now has to face the consequences, that it does not mean he did not love her, but that grown-ups sometimes make terrible mistakes. It struck me that my mother was finally being honest, not just with Lily, but with herself. The woman sitting across from me was not the same person who had stood by Robert's side while he disrespected my dreams and stole my inheritance. This was someone more like the mother I remembered from childhood, clear-eyed and forthright. Over the following weeks, our relationship began to slowly rebuild. It was not easy. There were difficult conversations, painful memories, moments when old hurts resurfaced, but there was also a genuine effort on both sides to understand and to heal. One evening, about 2 months after Robert's arrest, my mother asked if she could visit my new apartment. I had finally found a place of my own, a small but bright one-bedroom not far from the studio. It was nothing special, but it was affordable, and most importantly, it was mine. When she arrived, she looked around with genuine interest, admiring the artwork on the walls, some of it mine, some from artist friends. "You have created a beautiful home, Claire," she said. "It reminds me of the little house your father and I had when we first got married. We did not have much, but we were so happy." She sat down at my small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "I have been thinking a lot about those days," she continued, "about who I was before everything changed, before I lost myself. What was it about Robert?" I asked the question that had been haunting me for years. "What made you change so completely for him?" She was quiet for a long time. Considering it was not one thing, it was 1,000 tiny things so small that I did not notice them happening. "After your father died, I was so lost, so scared. I had never been alone before. I went straight from my parents' house to college, then married your father right after graduation. I did not know how to be an independent person." She took a sip of her tea. "Robert offered security when I felt most vulnerable. He made all the decisions, handled all the problems. It was a relief at first. Then gradually, it became the norm. I stopped thinking for myself because it was easier to let him think for me. Each time I gave up a little bit of myself, it made it easier to give up more the next time. But he was cruel, I said to me, and I suspect to you as well, behind closed doors." "The cruelty came later," she admitted, "after I was already isolated, already dependent. And by then it seemed normal somehow. He would be harsh, then apologetic, cold, then loving. I never knew which Robert I would get, so I was always trying to please him to avoid triggering his displeasure. That is textbook emotional abuse. Mom, I know that now. My therapist has helped me understand the patterns, the control, the isolation, the manipulation. But when you are in it, Claire, you cannot see it clearly. It is like being in a fog where everything is distorted. I thought about that fog, how it had descended over our family gradually, how it had changed all of us. I tried to tell you, I said quietly, about what he was doing to Dad's company, about the trust fund, about the kind of person he really was. "I know you did," she said, her eyes filling with tears, "and I failed you. I chose him over you over and over again. I cannot take that back, Claire. I can only tell you how deeply sorry I am and hope that someday you might forgive me." It was the most direct apology she had given me, and I could see the genuine remorse in her eyes. "I am working on it," I said honestly. "Forgiveness is a process, not an event, but I am trying." She reached across the table and tentatively took my hand. "That is more than I deserve. Thank you." As the months passed and Robert's trial approached, our family continued its slow journey toward healing. Lily began to spend weekends with me occasionally, which gave my mother some much-needed time for herself and allowed me to build a relationship with my half-sister. I discovered that she had indeed inherited the artistic streak that ran through our family, and I took joy in nurturing that talent in her. My mother found a part-time job as a teacher's aide, her first step toward reclaiming her independence. The financial situation was complicated. Most of the assets were frozen pending the outcome of Robert's trial, and there were creditors and potential lawsuits to deal with. But with Harold's help, she was navigating these challenges one day at a time. The most significant moment in our reconciliation came unexpectedly on the anniversary of my father's death. In previous years, I had always visited his grave alone, Robert having deemed such remembrances morbid and discouraged my mother from participating. This year, I was surprised when my mother called and asked if she could join me. We met at the cemetery on a crisp autumn day, the kind my father had loved. We stood together before his headstone, each lost in our own memories. "He would be so proud of you, Claire," my mother said softly. "Not just for your art, though. He always believed in your talent, but for your strength, your integrity, for standing up for the truth even when it was difficult." "He would be proud of you, too," I replied. "For finding your way back to yourself," she looked at me surprised. "You really think so?" "I know so." Dad always said people can change if they have the courage to face themselves honestly. You have done that, Mom. It took time, and it took some hard circumstances to make it happen, but you have done it. She wiped away tears. "I wish he could see us now. See, Lily, see the person you have become." "He does," I said, surprising myself with the certainty I felt. Not in a religious way necessarily, but in the way that the people we love continue to live through us, through the values they instilled in us. We stood there a while longer, and for the first time in years, I felt my father's presence, not as a source of grief, but as a source of strength. And I felt something else too, something I had thought was lost forever, a connection with my mother, a fragile bridge being rebuilt between us. Robert's trial finally came, and with it a reckoning. The evidence against him was overwhelming. In addition to my testimony and Walter's numerous financial experts detailed the complex web of fraud he had created, former employees spoke about his intimidation tactics. Even Robert's own business partners, seeing which way the wind was blowing, turned against him, eager to distance themselves from his crimes. My mother was called to testify as well. I sat in the courtroom as she took the stand, looking small but dignified. She spoke clearly about how Robert had isolated her, controlled her, used her name and signature on documents she did not understand. She admitted her own failings, her willful blindness at times, but also detailed the subtle coercion that had characterized their relationship. Robert watched her with cold hatred, the mask of charm completely gone now. When his own time came to testify, he tried to portray himself as a misunderstood businessman, the victim of jealous competitors, and a vindictive stepdaughter. But his arrogance betrayed him. Under cross-examination, he became defensive, then angry, revealing the true nature that had always lurked beneath the polished exterior. The verdict came as no surprise. Guilty on all counts. The judge, citing the calculated nature of his crimes and his lack of remorse, sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison. As he was led away, Robert looked directly at me, his eyes promising retribution. But for the first time, that look held no power over me. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. My mother and I slipped away quietly, leaving Harold to deal with the press. We walked together to a small park nearby and sat on a bench, processing the events of the day. "It is really over," she said, sounding both relieved and somewhat lost. "What happens now?" "One day at a time," I replied. "That is all any of us can do." She nodded, then said hesitantly, "Claire, I have been thinking. The house is going to be sold to pay off creditors. Aunt Margaret has been wonderful, but Lily and I need our own place eventually. I was thinking of looking for something small, maybe in Cambridge, near your apartment, if that would be okay with you." It was a question loaded with meaning. She was asking for more than geographical proximity. She was asking if I wanted her in my life on a regular basis, if our reconciliation was real and lasting. "I think that would be good," I said. "For all of us." The smile that lit up her face was reminiscent of the mother I remembered from childhood, before grief and manipulation had dimmed her light. It was not a complete return to who she had been. We had all been changed too much for that. But it was a new beginning, a chance to build something different, but perhaps equally valuable. As we sat there, I reflected on the strange, painful journey that had brought us to this point, a journey that had begun with a cruel text message, a message that had seemed like the final betrayal, but had actually been the catalyst for truth and eventual healing. 1 year after Robert's conviction, I stood in the center of a small art gallery in downtown Boston, surrounded by my work. It was my first solo exhibition, a collection of paintings that chronicled my journey from betrayal to healing. The series was titled Reconstructions, each piece representing a moment of breaking down and building back up. David, my mentor and friend, had helped me secure the space through his connections in the art community. He moved through the crowded room now, proudly introducing me to collectors and critics. Olivia was there too, manning the guest book and making sure everything ran smoothly. "Your work is powerful," an older gentleman told me, studying a particularly emotional piece that depicted a house with walls made of shattered glass. "There is pain here, but also tremendous strength." "Thank you," I replied. It is autobiographical in a sense. Art has always been my way of processing life. As I turned away from the conversation, I saw them enter, my mother and Lily. They had promised to come, but I had been so busy greeting guests that I had not noticed their arrival. My mother looked elegant in a simple blue dress, so different from the designer outfits Robert had once insisted she wear. Lily, now 8 years old, bounced excitedly beside her, her eyes wide as she took in the gallery filled with her big sister's artwork. They made their way toward me, navigating through the crowd. "Claire, this is amazing," Lily exclaimed, hugging me impulsively. "Everyone is looking at your paintings." I laughed, returning her hug. "What do you think of them? Do you have a favorite?" She nodded vigorously and pointed to a canvas on the far wall, one of the more hopeful pieces in the collection. It showed 2 female figures of different heights walking hand in hand toward a sunrise. "That one. It is us, right? You and me and Mom." "It is," I confirmed, touched that she had recognized the symbolism. My mother stepped forward, then, embracing me, with the warmth that had once been so natural between us and was gradually returning. "I am so proud of you, Claire," she whispered. "Your father would be too." The past year had been one of rebuilding not just relationships, but lives. My mother and Lily had indeed moved to Cambridge into a modest apartment not far from mine. My mother had returned to teaching full-time, rediscovering the passion for education that had once defined her. Lily was thriving in her new school, making friends and developing her own artistic talents. The legal and financial aftermath of Robert's crimes had been messy and complicated. Most of the assets had been seized or sold to repay those he had defrauded. My mother had declared bankruptcy a process that was humiliating, but ultimately liberating. She was starting over from scratch financially, but doing so honestly and independently. As for me, I had continued to work at Hartman's studio, but with increasing recognition for my own art. This exhibition was a major milestone, a statement that I was no longer just an assistant, but an artist in my own right. The paintings were selling well, a validation of both my talent and the universal themes of resilience and renewal that informed my work. Most importantly, the psychological wounds had begun to heal. My mother and I had continued our individual therapy sessions and occasionally attended family therapy together. We had learned to communicate honestly to address issues directly rather than letting resentments fester. We had learned to set boundaries and respect them. My relationship with Lily had blossomed into a genuine bond of sisterly affection. I saw in her aspects of myself at that age the creativity, the sensitivity, the openness to experience. But she was growing up in a healthier environment than I had after my father's death, with a mother who was present and attentive, who encouraged her authentic self rather than trying to mold her into someone else's expectations. Robert remained in prison, his appeals having been denied. He had attempted to contact my mother several times in the beginning, alternating between manipulation threats and false remorse. With the support of her therapist and lawyer, she had maintained firm boundaries, eventually obtaining a no-contact order. He was no longer a presence in our lives, though the damage he had done would always be part of our history. The exhibition concluded with a small reception for close friends and family. As the last of the general public departed, I found myself in a quiet corner with my mother. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into her purse. I found it when we were moving out of the house. She handed me a small, worn leather notebook. I recognized it immediately as my father's sketchbook, the one he had carried everywhere in the last years of his life. "I thought Robert had gotten rid of all Dad's things," I said, running my fingers over the soft leather. "He tried to," my mother admitted, "but I managed to hide a few special items. This was one of them. I should have given it to you years ago, but Robert would not have allowed it. I finished for her." She nodded sadly. I am sorry, Claire, for that and for so many other things. I know, Mom, and I forgive you. The words came easily now, no longer forced or hesitant. The forgiveness had been a process built day by day, through actions more than words, through consistent effort and genuine change. I opened the sketchbook, flipping through pages filled with my father's distinctive style, landscapes, architectural details, quick portraits of people he had encountered. And then near the end, a series of sketches of me as a teenager, sitting at my own drawing table, absorbed in my work. Beside one of the sketches, he had written Claire at 15, already more talented than her old man. The world will know her name someday. Tears blurred my vision. He never stopped believing in me. Neither did I, my mother said softly. Not really. Even at my worst, in the deepest fog of Robert's manipulation, there was always a part of me that knew who you truly were. I just lost access to that part of myself for a while. Later that evening, after the reception had ended and the gallery had emptied, I remained behind to take one last look at my exhibition before the pieces would be taken down the next day. Many of the paintings had sold, but a few would return home with me, permanent reminders of this chapter in my life. I thought about the strange, painful journey that had brought me to this moment, about the text message that had seemed like the ultimate betrayal, but had actually been the catalyst for truth, about the lawyer's urgent email that had started the process of unraveling Robert's web of deception, about the courage it had taken for my mother to face her own complicity and begin the hard work of reclaiming herself. I thought about the nature of home, how it is not necessarily a physical place, but a state of being. For years, I had mourned the loss of my childhood home, not just the house itself, but the sense of safety and belonging it had represented. Now I understood that home was something we could rebuild, something we carried within us and created through our connections with others. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my mother. Lily is asleep. I am so proud of you, Claire. Today was a testament to your talent and your resilience. Love you. I smiled as I typed my reply. Love you too, Mom. See you tomorrow for lunch. Such a simple exchange, the kind that happens between mothers and daughters every day. Yet for us, it represented something profound, a reclaiming of what had been lost, a rebuilding of trust that had once seemed irreparably broken. The journey was not over. Of course, there would be difficult days ahead, moments when old hurts resurfaced, challenges to face, but we would face them together now with honesty and courage, with a commitment to truth that would not be compromised. And that perhaps was the most important lesson of all, that even after the most devastating betrayals, healing is possible. Not through magical transformations or easy forgiveness, but through the hard daily work of facing truth, setting boundaries, and choosing courage over comfort. Through recognizing that people can change if they truly want to, but that such change requires acknowledgement of harm done and consistent effort to do better. As I turned off the gallery lights and stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. The message that had once proclaimed I no longer had a home had proven to be one of Robert's many lies. I had a home not in the physical sense of a building with locks that could be changed, but in the connections I had rebuilt, in the truth I had fought for, in the authentic self I had reclaimed. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that seemed unforgivable at the time? How did you find your way through it? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found meaning in my journey, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more stories about resilience and healing. Remember, sometimes the most painful messages can be the beginning of our greatest transformations. Thank you for listening, and may you find strength in your own reconstructions.